Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Katherine Duffy, and I am the Director of Professional Development for the Southwestern Association of Episcopal Schools. We're glad you're here. I'm delighted to welcome you to this conversation on this important topic of faculty evaluation. Our panelist today is David Parks, and David is currently the faculty member, Director of Service Learning at All Saints in Fort Worth. He's recently been named as the head of upper school at Holland Hall. So David, we're glad you're here. It's going to be a great hour, I think.
Yeah, well, and thanks for this invitation. I think that, Mary Katherine, this goes back not only several years to an NAIS conference or an NAES conference, but even more recently for the SAES conference, where you and I were talking a lot about how to support teachers and how to support people that are really in charge of curriculum. So I love seeing heads of school on this. I love seeing directors of curriculum, and then various age groups that are represented. So
right
to be here.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot to offer everyone, and I want to make sure that we start with saying to everyone on the call that we want your participation here. We want this to be engaging, and so a couple of ways that you can do that. Number one, we want you to put your questions in the Q&A box. If you have specific questions around what David's talking about, please put those in the Q&A box. We also want you to be engaged in the chat. I'm going to be watching the chat, and we're going to be asking you to think about some things. We do want you to have a pen and paper out in order to write down some ideas around things that David is going to be talking about. So ways in which you can be involved, again, is to involve yourself in the chat. Put your questions in the Q&A. We do have a recording of this. For those of you who are watching the recording, we would encourage you to do the same thing. When David gives us the opportunity to kind of take a step back and think about something, that you might do that. You will get a copy of the slide deck. We will be sending that out after the meeting. And so we do want you to know that. And so you don't have to take notes, but please do take the time to engage and answer questions that we're asking. So I'm going to do this. That's kind of all the housekeeping at this time. But David, I'd love for you to just kind of begin with just talking a little bit about your background and kind of not just your background, but where you're going, because you're about to make a change.
Yeah, a big one. And it's coming, I think, before we know it. I am finishing up my 13th year in Episcopal education, and I love what we do in Episcopal schools. I think that over time and throughout my career, that love for Episcopal education has grown and deepened in a lot of ways. And I've done a lot in the two schools where I've served, and tried to find as many ways as I can to learn and to grow. And I think that, if I can be quite honest, I've never really had great experiences with evaluation and professional growth. And I think that when I talk with other people, other colleagues, kind of here and elsewhere across the country, I think that feeling is quite similar. There are probably two things that are shaping how I'm coming at this today. And the first one is the work that I've been doing at Johns Hopkins with their independent school leadership program. It's been excellent. The class that I think really ignited my interest was on professional growth and development. And so some of what we are going to be talking about today and some of the work we're doing is shaped by that. And then maybe as kind of a transition here, the second thing that is really in my headspace right now is where I'm going to be in just over a month. That we're moving our family from Fort Worth. We've had 9 awesome years here, and we're going up to Holland Hall, where I'll be the head of upper school, and I'm excited. And I think I'm excited in part because one, for a number of reasons, but two, because I am able to influence culture in that position. And so before we start thinking about culture, I would love to take a few minutes and kind of answer these two questions, but let's focus on the first one right here. And I would love some reflections in the chat, so we can kind of, maybe build a little bit of empathy, but see some of these common threads that exist within the challenges that administrators face in either developing and designing a faculty growth and development system or implementing that. So can we take about a minute or two, and in the chat, let's start to name some of the challenges that administrators face when they are designing or implementing an evaluation or a growth system?
Yeah, I think this is super important that we begin with this because, I mean, having been an administrator, I totally struggled with this. I ran into, over 17 years, I probably came up with 50 different ways to evaluate people. And I'm not sure any of them were super effective. And I do hear regularly, and I think it speaks to the fact that registration on this webinar is 40 people. I think this topic speaks to the heart of what we struggle with. And I love that you're coming at this from the idea of culture. And because you and I've talked about this, that's where it begins, is building a culture with your faculty and and educating them on why we're doing what we're doing. I think that's true even when, as a head of school, we're being evaluated. Yeah. What's the culture behind why we're being evaluated in the beginning to begin with? And it's to grow. Yeah. So let's see, we've got a couple of responses. Faculty buy-in is a big challenge, especially at schools where there's never been a professional growth plan and evaluation process previously. Yep. Yeah. Creating a concise and valuable tool that an administrator can share with teachers, a tool that encourages conversation. I really like that.
And that's, I think, going to be one of the big takeaways from today is really working toward that.
Yeah. Growing a growth mindset in faculty. I think there's real value in getting people to be open to feedback and not be afraid of it. Yeah. Time to accurately observe teachers, making it relevant and meaningful without fear, systems that teachers enjoy and look forward to. Right. I think some of our teachers have a fear around faculty growth and development. It's a challenge to think of creating something that works for both classroom teachers and co-curricular. It needs to feel like it's coming from the teacher seeking growth and not a top-down mentality. Yeah, those are all real. That's
and I mean, in a sense, I think that these summarize some of the research that's going on in this field. I think that having a concise plan that can be agreed upon with the administrators and the faculty is really key. And again, that's one of the things we're working toward. And then I love how some of these are touching on this idea of growth without fear of losing our jobs, or growth without repercussions. Right. It's challenging in schools when we talk about wanting our kids to grow and to fail. And yet, if they do, it's going to be on their permanent transcript, or it's going to so negatively affect them in their position and in their standing of the school.
Yeah, it's definitely a mixed message.
Yeah,
we're sending a mixed message around that. Yeah, right. I agree.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah, and again, I love this. Like the peer reviews is something that is great. If we can kind of move from this question into the second one, what are some of the core challenges that teachers face during the evaluation and growth process? I very much can empathize with teachers on this end, because I've been the recipient of so many of these interactions.
Yeah, one of the things as people are putting their answers in for this question about what teachers face, I would say that I think teachers often feel not necessarily deservedly so, but they just feel this pressure because of, and I hate to blame it on public school, but I came out of public school, so I know there's a mentality around evaluation that somebody's out to get you. And I think that's the challenge that teachers face, is they don't see, they've gotten so attacked at times by these kind of random binary kind of it's this or this, that they don't see it, the connection between their evaluation and their growth.
Right, absolutely. And I love these two that have come in, the worry about who's evaluating and how it's connected to my security and my pay and my promotions.
Sure.
I hope to identify or to tackle this idea of the pressure to please and to conform to a particular given way. Again, like we talk about wanting to grow with our young people and how they need to adopt a growth mindset. And yet in part, maybe the systems that we create inhibit that, not only in them, but also in us.
100%. I agree.
And the snapshot of it being of a tiny snapshot of a larger picture. I was up with my daughter all night last night. A kid is being a knucklehead in one day. maybe, or, somebody tells me that they're going to come observe me. And so I put on the dog and pony show, and it is something altogether different than what happens in a normal day.
And let me tell you what would happen in my class if that happened.
Yeah.
Some kid would say, why are we doing it this way? We never do that.
Yeah.
Call me out. So
my first year of teaching, I didn't know better. The assistant head of school came to evaluate me. And when he left, he said, or my student said that I was the first teacher that didn't act differently when I was being evaluated than when I wasn't.
Right.
I think I was kind of naive at that moment of the power, of the power structure that exists between, somebody who's evaluating me and me as a teacher. Again, like this idea of pressure, the teacher puts pressure on themselves, even if their administrators aren't putting pressure on them. Yep. We're going to talk about Enneagram stuff here in a while, and Mary Katherine, I think that may resonate with you.
Yes, it does. 100%. Different people feel different ways. So
yeah,
sure.
And I love trying to build a little bit of this empathy kind of early on, because the challenges that administrators face, so many that we've touched on, and I have a litany of a list here, but that those are real. And those of us that are designing these systems and these protocols and these opportunities for evaluation and professional growth need to take that into consideration, but we also need to take into consideration how it affects teachers. And I think for me, one of the things that my work with Hopkins has really taught me is that psychologists have almost proven that the current systems of professional growth and development and evaluation in schools are just so broken that psychologically, fundamentally, they don't seem to work. They don't give us a clear picture of what's going on. And then it's so shrouded in the veil of mystery. And so I hope to be able to address this, and I'm hopeful that I think we'll be able to do just that of kind of showing my cards early, trying to separate evaluation from professional growth. So as I've said a couple of times, my headspace is very much thinking about how I can develop a particular culture next year. And, I know that Holland Hall already has a great one, but how I can add to that and contribute to that. And so I think that we are missing an opportunity if we forget that evaluation and professional growth systems are opportunities to define, to articulate, to embody the particular culture of a school. And so this is going to be somewhat of the first little bit of our work here. Again, so much of my reading recently has been, has really shaped a lot of what we're going to be doing today. And if you haven't picked up Patrick Lencioni's The Advantage, I would really recommend it. He has tons of stuff on his website, on YouTube. But in The Advantage, he makes the simple argument that a healthy organization outperforms in almost every way a smart organization. And what we, I think, have an opportunity to do is to create systems and processes that create a healthy organization. And then secondly, I hope some of you have read this too, Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. Mary Katherine, you and I have talked about this quite a bit, but I love how she talks about interrogating reality and to examine where things are and where people are in an organization. I love this right here, where she says every organization wants to feel it's having real conversations with its employees, its customers, its territory, and with the unknown future that's emerging around it. It seems to me that whenever we have professional growth and evaluation systems, that they do not foster real conversations, that they are shrouded in fear and mystery and judgment, so on and so forth. And then,
and I would recommend, if you have not read that Fierce Conversations book, you should read it as an administrator, because it is incredibly helpful to understand kind of how you have those conversations in a way that that's helpful and not hurtful. Yeah.
And I think that it allows us to live into our vision as Episcopal schools.
Right.
Where we are really honoring dignity. I think that extends to our faculty. Sure. It has to begin with our faculty in so many ways. So here again, let me show my cards that ISM, I think they are on to something here because of the psychological challenges that exist within professional growth and evaluation systems. ISM suggests that we separate an evaluative system from a system of professional growth. And so this is kind of what we're going to be doing for the next 40 minutes or so. For sure, they argue that you onboard, you hire people based on health, right? Kind of what Patrick Lencioni is arguing, that you hire people based on fit, based on their ability to execute the mission of the institution. And then you are able to allow them opportunities to grow. So we're going to be talking about an evaluation system and then also a growth and renewal system here throughout our time. The first thing that ISM argues is that every school has to have or should have essential expectations. And these are the essential expectations that are required by or for everyone in the community to meet. Now, ISM differentiates this a little bit than how we do it here at All Saints. At All Saints, we have essential expectations for everybody in the entire community to embody. But ISM argues that these are required for all teachers from the onset of their employment, and these are conditions for their renewal of the contract every year. These are based on a binary system. Either you meet them or you don't. And if you don't meet some of these criteria, then ISM argues, and I think that Susan Scott would say the same thing, that you address them immediately if evidence is suggesting that the teacher is not meeting these. That these ensure that all teachers are performing at a specific standard, and it also gives the school opportunity for corrective process. Now, let me go back and just remind us that we are trying to differentiate and separate an evaluative tool from a tool that allows for opportunities for growth and growth and development.
But this is a little bit like when you talk about, there's a slide that we do for boards where we talk about that it's a pyramid, and you have the bottom pyramid is basically the bare minimum of what a school should be doing. Mm-hmm. And then you have, you're accredited. And so you have the standards, which right. is even higher than just the bare minimum. And then you have best practices at the top. Yeah. Where you, and this is the same. Those essential expectations are the bare minimum of what we should be doing as educators. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. And these are standardized. Either you meet them or you don't. So this is an example, and we're going to come back to this slide here in a little bit, but this is an example of some of the essential expectations that ISM suggests. All teachers at this made up school are expected and required to, and we can read some of these. We'll look at them in a little bit of a deeper way later on. So when we do send out the slide deck, this might be a really good resource. At the same time, this book is like $60 or $70 in the hardback version. If you're into a Kindle or a digital version, it's $10. So it's a pretty cheap buy if you need it. So we're going to come back to this, but I want to get you all thinking along the lines of what does this look like in your school? ISM does not necessarily suggest that all of us in all of our unique schools, we take this and we implement it tomorrow, that we hand this out to faculty. That ISM rather suggests that we use this as a guide to create what are the essential expectations at my school that fit within my culture. So again, I want to take about 5 minutes and start thinking about the culture that exists within our particular schools. And Lencioni argues in The Advantage that kind of a healthy organization is able to do 4 things really well. And that is build an effective leadership team, create clarity, over-communicate clarity, and then reinforce clarity. And I think what an essential expectations allow schools to do is to create clarity. These are things that are shared to faculty early and often. These are a list of expectations that are given to new hires. Maybe even they're put out whenever schools are soliciting applicants for a particular job. And so, he asks in his book that people in an organization need to be able to answer these questions. Why do we exist? Mm-hmm. How do we behave? Again, if he is arguing for health over smart, then human behavior is really key here. What are the rituals? What are the practices that schools that our individual school participates in? What do we do?
And what you're saying really is that faculty ought to know these things. It shouldn't just be the administrator that understands this.
Yeah.
We should, that's the idea of clarity, I think, is
Right.
that all of us know what our culture is like and who we are as a school.
Right.
And we all buy into that, which I just put in the chat the quote by Peter Drucker, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast."
Right.
It's kind of the same concept, is if we're not clear about who we are and what kind of culture our school subscribes to,
right,
then it doesn't matter what the expectations are.
Yeah. And I think if we're honest, Lencioni talks about accidental values, that in some ways, some of the cultures of our school are not where we want them to be. Sometimes we all value particular things in institutions, but they are not necessarily the things that our institutions want to value. And so I love how, again, we're trying to frame this in curating a particular culture. And so where he talks about accidental values, these are evident in an organization, but they're not necessarily good for the life of the organization. They're not necessarily good for the health of the organization. I'm sure we can all kind of rattle off the top of our heads a few different values that our institutions have that have risen by accident, and maybe we've allowed them to exist for too long. Secondly, I love how Lencioni talks about permission to play values. These are minimum behavioral standards, right? Not necessarily degrees or expertise in a particular area, but these are behavioral standards that are required in an organization. Although they are extremely important, they don't, he argues, differentiate or clarify one institution or one school from another. And this is key. In competitive markets, permission to play values are not enough, to put on our essential expectations. Families can choose between great public schools, great charter schools, other private schools, home schools. Like, there are so many other ways in which people can educate their children. And so we are really in a competitive marketplace. So yes, there are some permission to play values, but I think that is maybe the benchmark, but we can do better, right? In our essential expectations, we can really do better. Which for me, I want to land here for a second. That he argues that the core values, that these are unchanging, that these are the 2, the 3, sometimes he said the 4 main values that lie at the heart of an organization. These don't change over time. And, Mary Katherine, when you and I were talking about this earlier, we focused on this quote where he says that an organization that know it's identified their core values when it allows itself to be punished for living out those values.
Right.
This, I think, is moment for us to pause and to kind of write down, like, what are the core values that are essential to our institutions
that you're not going to give in on. And I think this really matters, David, right now more than ever, because COVID has changed the game for so much, and changed people's perspective on life.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's changed their kind of how they see what they want. And so I think a school more than ever has to decide, who are we? What are our core values, and what are we not willing to compromise on? An example of this would be DEI, diversity,
right.
Ensuring that this is something there may be people who don't like it, and that's fine. We're not the school for them.
Right.
I would have argued that, and maybe it'll happen again, but this whole, a practical example of this was this whole idea of safety and masking. We're going to decide as a campus that some schools just decided as a campus, we may not have to mask, but we're all going to, because that's our value. And some schools may have said, hey, we're not going to at all. And and you may think that we're unsafe, but we're not going to compromise this. I like this example of it, because I think this idea of saying to as a school, this is who we are. And you may not like it.
One of my classmates right now in one of my Hopkins courses, his school is a progressive school.
Yeah.
And I think that they embody the values and the practices of progressive education. And he is quite open with how their institution has said for the last 30 or 40 years that they are a progressive school. That maybe a core value is student-centeredness. Maybe a core value is relating to leadership. And I think when we talk about core values, we're also referencing opportunities to enhance your unique value proposition. Remember, I think in competitive markets, this is a really clear opportunity for a school to say who it is and to embody it in some very practical ways.
And I think also that this, if you back up and you think about the hiring process or the fact that schools, and I know that we're all talking about the Great Resignation and this idea of the teacher shortage now more than ever. If we're going to attract the best people, we have to be able to say, this is who we are. This is the kind of school you'd be teaching at. This is the culture you're going to be living into.
Right.
And that's going to attract the very best.
Yeah.
And if you don't know that answer, or you can't say that, or it seems ambiguous, then people are going to know that.
Yeah. Our marketing and communications director, I think, does such a good job, but she talks so often about kind of values promised, like these values that we promise our families. They also need to be the values that are executed within the classroom.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about these essential qualities that people possess, I think that this is really key. And then finally here, we have aspirational values. These are characteristics that our organizations want to have. Now, these probably don't go on our essential expectations, but maybe there's a big line that says, but this is where we're going. Maybe there's this differentiation between these are the essential expectations, but here's where we're headed in 5 years. And we're hoping that these become essential here in a couple of years.
And so just to back up, I want to make sure people understand that as we are, the reason we talk about all of these values is that as you build your list of essential expectations, that bottom, that basic list, you want to keep in mind who you are as a school, what matters to you, what your values are. All of this stuff is the cultural idea is got to be at the forefront of your decision making as you build that list.
Yeah, and you can see here that some of these the ISM suggests are not necessarily about pedagogical approaches.
Right.
They're not necessarily about student-centered learning, formative assessments, summative assessments. They're not as clear on some of those issues. We'll get there. But these are what teachers are evaluated on a yearly basis. And these provide opportunities for school leaders to define and to ensure that that culture is practiced within the life of the school.
I think one of the things that jumps out at me about this, David, is that I can remember, and I suspect that we would all have this story, this challenge of having a teacher, a faculty member that was super, super, super good at teaching a particular topic. Maybe they were really a great teacher in the academic realm.
Yeah.
But the idea of interacting with colleagues in a respectful manner, that was gone. It couldn't do it.
Right.
And I know that we've all run into that. And that's what I love about these essential expectations is now we have I don't care how good a teacher you are.
Yeah.
At this school, we treat each other with respect and we're collegial and we share and that's an area that you are not meeting.
Right. And in those conversations, because, and we'll get here, these are observable, I'm going to touch on that here in a second, but these are observable. And ISM suggests that the evaluator evaluates often, is very public in their evaluation. And I think in part, they do that because they don't want to catch people on a bad day, right? They want to have an accurate, a multidimensional understanding of the faculty member embodying the core values of the institution. And again, ISM suggests that the vast majority of our faculty should be meeting expectations almost all the time. These are not aspirational insofar as like the only a few people meet them. They are really practical in how we hire good people. We really embody our culture as an Episcopal school. Let me kind of look on these last two. Comply with school policies and procedures, as articulated. Again, either you do that or you don't.
Right.
And then the final one. ISM suggests that this is required in every single essential expectations list, that faculty authentically engage in self-reflection and an annual personal and professional growth that is connected to where we're going to go next. And so, I want to be very mindful of time. It's 2:31. Maybe take a minute and jot down some of the values that exist within the school. Maybe they're accidental, but for the sake of time, I would really suggest focusing in on some of the core values of who your school is, and then maybe kind of flirt with those aspirational values of who you want your school to be.
You said that while people are thinking about that, and y'all don't have to put that in the chat. You can just put that on your paper. But I think about that, this idea of making sure that every teacher, every faculty member, every staff member is authentically engaging in professional growth. And I told you this story earlier about the one time I had a teacher that did a self-evaluation, and she just was perfect in all of it. I mean, there was not one single, and it was kind of on this essential expectations. But and I'm like, well, okay, well, so where do you see kind of the need for growth? And she's like, nothing, I'm great. And I'm like, okay, what? And she's like, no, I'm great at what I do. I don't think there's nothing to change, nothing to grow. And I just was so stunned. And I think that I think that exists in our schools where people don't understand that everyone needs to grow.
Yeah. And, I think I'm going to kind of lean on some of the people on this call, that it's our responsibility to model that.
Yes. Yes.
And again, I think Linchoni argues this. I think that Susan Scott argues this. I think that sometimes I worry that in our schools, we want our young people to grow, and yet we are not committed to it ourselves.
Yes.
And
100%.
And I think that heads of school all the way down, that there is this posture of growth, and vulnerability and humility and lack of hubris. Like, there's so many ways to really get at this. But I think that having this is really key. Now, if we go back to some of the challenges that people said at the very beginning, I think that if we have an essential expectations list by which teachers are evaluated, it addresses some of those challenges. We know what we're being evaluated against. Right. And if we go back here, maintaining professional credentials. One of them was, fostering a safe, predictable, and supportive environment for kids. We know what these are. And I would probably argue that the vast majority of faculty know how to execute on these expectations. If not, there are opportunities for growth here.
Right.
But this takes away, some of those gaps that exist, maybe between expertise of a upper administrator who's evaluating and the expertise of a fifth grade teacher. In some cases, the evaluator has never taught fifth grade,
right,
or has never taught French, or has such a different skill set that the teacher doesn't value their input, and the administrator in some ways doesn't know what they are trying to evaluate. But in these, because they are demonstratable, they are observable, we get multiple forms of evidence of these. We should be able to check off for about 96% of our faculty that they're knocking all these out of the park.
Yeah, I agree.
So, the first task that we've been trying to reflect upon is how to create an evaluation system that is divorced from a system of growth and renewal. And, ISM suggests that those of us on the call are not necessarily the ones that are fully and solely equipped to create this list. that maybe this is something that should be done within a community of stakeholders, administrators, department chairs, division heads, teachers. And, I want to even throw out maybe students, maybe that there are opportunities for students to be either involved in this step or in the second step where we're headed. So
now
now
let me say this because I said I would earlier.
Yeah.
We understand that not every school has division heads and all of that. So if you are the sole administrator at your school, then what you can do is you can reach out to a couple of your, maybe your more tenured teachers, maybe people that you really feel like, hit the mark on the regular, and they can help you build this. And then it can go to the full faculty. Where you begin with, a small group of people. You don't have to do it by yourself. It may be that you begin by yourself. It may be that you reach out to colleagues at other schools and say, hey, this is the list that I've come up with. What do you think? Using this PowerPoint can help you begin that process. But I think to David's point, not feeling like you have to do it by yourself. And furthermore, not just having your own opinion. I think is important. I think the more stakeholders, the better. Yeah.
And don't do this in April or May. Summer's coming, and we have some opportunity, maybe teachers and administrators and heads of school, to be a bit more philosophical in the summer. To really plan, to listen, to reflect. And so I think that this discussion is really well timed.
Somebody actually said faculty buy-in is a big challenge. And I think this is where you can get that faculty buy-in, is helping getting your faculty to help develop those essential expectations.
Right. And I think a second way to get faculty buy-in is to respect their professional expertise. Early on, again, in this class that I had in my Hopkins program, we had to read this super dry book, but it was called The Adult Learner. And they differentiated between, andragogy from pedagogy, and tried to make the argument that adult learning in professional settings looks wholly different than teaching a second grade or something. And when I hear you say, I forgot what you said. When I hear you say, Mary Catherine, what'd you just say here? That we need to honor honor
kind of their input and their feedback and the idea that they don't have buy-in because they've just been given, this is what you have to do. Right.
So, that book argued that we need to honor the expertise of people, professionals, and let them identify where they need to grow. Let them identify where they want to take a leap of faith. Take this new opportunity for growth. And so that's where we're going to head.
Understanding that we recognize there will be some people who are so unaware of self. That they were like, number one, I don't need to, or number two, I just don't know. And then you're going to have to help. Send them to the school chaplain for confession. What do they say? Like, all can, none must, some should. That's right. Send them there. But I do think that on a more serious note, sometimes we want to preserve ourselves. And this is, again, I want to try to state this clearly. We need to be able to grow without repercussions to our job. We need to be able to grow without it affecting our pay. We need to be able to grow as foundational to our profession and to our schools. Exactly. And so that, I think, is where we're trying to head by separating these two. Yes, you meet the expectations. Now let's get to the fun stuff. Right. How can you grow? How can you, how can you be, if you want to use the language we did earlier, how can you be aspirational? Because you've met the permission to play. You've met the core values. Now let's think big and let's go there. Right. And so what ISM argues here is that you kind of create like another list, but I'll show you a few examples that I think encapsulate this. That by creating a characteristic professional excellence, ISM is arguing that we define what excellent teaching looks like at our schools, that we define what happens in the best way in our classrooms, whether we have
3-year-olds or whether we have 18-year-olds that are headed off to school. So here is, kind of how they talk about it at ISM. These are the unique qualities that bring the school's mission to life. If the head of school is about the why and the mission, the portrait of a graduate is kind of like the what, but this is the how. This is how teaching and learning happens at our schools. And I think it asks this question: what does excellent teaching look like at your school?
That's a great question to ask, just of your own, in your own situation.
And this, I think, allows heads of school, leaders, curriculum leaders to kind of be quiet and to listen, to ask this question: what does excellent teaching look like at our school? I have 3 different examples here. This first one is from a school, I believe, in Missouri, that you guys can see on the right. And they have listed 8 or 9 kind of core competencies, core characteristics of professional excellence that are embodied at this school. I'm sure that many of our schools have some of this, but I want to just give a second for people to look and to read over some of these: to be well balanced, to be student-centered. There's various definitions of what that looks like, but a school's commitment to excellence in student-centered education allows them to distinguish themselves from their competitors.
I know you're going to say this at some point, but the thing that jumps out at me about, be skillful with technology.
Yeah.
One way that this can really be super helpful in the hiring process is that this is something that you give to a potential candidate.
Right.
And then they can begin to understand what it means to be a faculty member at your school.
Yeah.
The idea of skillful with technology, if you're in a preschool that doesn't use much technology, that's fine. That's not a big deal. You don't have to be skillful. But if you're in a high school and you can't operate your email,
yeah,
that's a real problem.
Yeah.
So it becomes not just an essential expectation. It almost becomes that. And but I like the idea of you're defining this not just for the current people, but for the people that may come.
Yeah. Yeah, this is meaningful to families, prospective families, current parents. And I think that this is meaningful to faculty because they should be able to look at some of these and see areas for growth in almost every aspect.
Yeah.
If professional learning means like David, look at these and I realize that I have a lot of room to grow in developing a student-centered classroom. And this is partly my story. Then I can propose this to a mentor, to a coach. Right. I can write out kind of on a form: this is what I want to do. This is where I want to grow. This is what impact it's going to have on students. This is what I need. This is the support I need in order to grow in this. And again, this is not connected to my pay because I'm going to take a big leap and I'm going to mess up on some of this.
Yeah, this is the groundwork really for the self-evaluation idea.
Yeah.
Where we can look at that. And if we're building self-awareness in our culture and we're encouraging our faculty to be self-aware, then it's easy to look at that and go, well, I do really well at being grounded in the gospel or being a lifelong learner, but man, I need some help with technology. So I need some courses in that. And so now we get practical and we go, okay, David, you're my head of school. What can you do? How can we set some goals where you're funding some PD for me where I'm specifically asking for that?
And I think that this takes some of the responsibility off of dean of faculty, directors of curriculum, department chairs, division heads, where they have to be the experts always sharing professional development. No, if we put it on, if we allow professionals to be professional and to grow by giving them access to opportunities, I think that frees up the professional.
And this is where the buy-in comes in, because they've bought in.
Right? Like, in so many ways, teaching is like a mirror, and I see myself more clearly, and I see what I'm good at, and oh boy, do I see my downfalls really
For sure.
Very, very visibly. And I know my students see it too. So these are opportunities for growth. Here is a great school. I think this one is out of California. And I love how they not only talk about their characteristics of professional excellence, but I like how they frame it. And again, these are aspirational. These are faculty ought to be able to look at these and realize I have room to grow in almost every single category. But they also should see successes.
Yeah.
I can do this well, but I have room to grow here. Similarly, this was a school out of Virginia. They only had 3, that they create a highly effective learning environment, that they have deep connections to students, and then they model the portrait of a graduate.
This is good.
So, and again, I love how they have multiple bullets here, multiple points that maybe I do this one well, but maybe I don't do that. And so when I am proposing to my head of school, to my department chair, to my division head, hey, I really need to get better at open and effective communications. Can we work together to find some resources, some sessions, some classes, some reading, some research that I can kind of do on my own, maybe in orchestra with a few other people, and we can deep dive on these together.
Yeah.
So these are our 3 examples. And so again, forgive me if you wanted a SureTell list of how to do evaluation and how to do professional growth. I think that those come after a little bit of work, but that little bit of work, in my estimation, through doing so much of this research, is very well worth it.
Well, and the truth is that these are the resources that you can use to begin to develop the way it works in your school. But that's the whole point,
right?
Is that every school is different and and every leader is different.
Yeah.
And there's some basic ways, which I think we're talking about really is to develop that culture.
Right.
But you're going to have to design it around the way your school works.
Yeah. And like, what a neat way for a school to share to its faculty where it's going,
right?
To share to its prospective families where it's going, to share with its current families where it's going. And, again, as our director of marketing and communications constantly has to deal with is the promises that we make are now quickly and more efficiently becoming the promises that are executed in the classroom.
Right.
Again, it's about culture, it's about values, it's about participating in the clear practices and the rituals that make us who we are. I really like how Charlotte Danielson, in her framework for teaching, is able to be a very, very effective resource in a lot of this work. Because, as we just said, not only does she have kind of 4 domains that are broad, that are very general, but she has 6 or 7 components in each. Her book, forgive me, her book is one that I carry with me often, because it's so thoughtfully constructed. And her website is linked here. She has a ton of resources, but maybe these are ways in which we can more constructively think of what goes into planning and preparation. It's not that just a teacher plans and prepares, but there are a whole host of things that go into that. I mean, I wish that more people could realize how difficult and complex teaching really is.
For sure.
Especially when heads of school are coming under such fire, when teachers are coming under such fire, where morale is so low. I wish that we could pull back the veil and show people how difficult it is. Well, maybe this is an opportunity to allow teachers to see how difficult our profession is and see opportunities for their own growth and support.
Right.
I haven't said this yet, but ISM argues that our professional expectations and systems of growth need to be predictable and supportive, that we need to be able to do this readily. And maybe that means delineating what goes into a clear classroom environment. Maybe that means helping faculty understand the multifaceted ways in which instruction can be executed. That maybe, again, it allows us to see these varying factors that pull at our responsibilities every single day. Similarly, if you're familiar with Danielson's framework, she also has levels of performance or levels of performance here. And what's tricky is I want to use this as an evaluative tool. And I don't think that that's how Danielson designed it. I think that she designed this as a way for me to reflect and to see, I really don't know much about adolescent development of what happens between 14, 15, 16. And I need to grow in that to be a more effective person in planning my lessons.
So you're saying that you think this is really helpful to the teacher to continue with the self-evaluation process.
Yeah.
What am I, maybe sometimes it's, again, it's not to say that the administrator can't also use it.
Right.
And go, hey, I notice you don't know anything about what you're teaching,
Yeah.
but that it's for the teacher as well.
Right. I think that there's similar to like a student-led conference, like there's a collaborative nature here. I think that the teacher, this comment, I think Danielson's models are ideal for coaching. Absolutely. They give the coach nomenclature that they may not have otherwise had. They give examples, and much like a really well-defined rubric does for some of our students, it allows people to see varying levels of performance.
Where should I be?
Yeah.
In these areas. Yeah.
And this is something I think, my new head of school had this laminated. In my interview, he showed me that he uses this as a coach. And I think that this is something that if we are in the business of coaching teachers, we need to have this in our toolbox and maybe even give it to the teachers. Again, this is a way to maybe help people articulate their characteristics of professional excellence. I've seen a lot of schools create their characteristics of professional excellence over the course of a year, and they have multiple voices in doing so. And this is, again, as such an interesting quote or comment that, yes, a lot of teachers become very defensive. Absolutely. When these tools are used for evaluation. I think if you do a quick Google search, a lot of the time Danielson's framework is used for evaluation. And I do not think that that's how it was intended. Again, I sort of like where ISM is going with this. Let's make the evaluative process a binary way in which you either do it or you don't. Either I show up by 7:45 routinely or I don't.
Right.
And then let's remove the fear, let's remove the threats, and let's allow faculty to grow. And I think that in some ways it allows them to really blossom here. So I love this comment that teachers become very, very defensive, and I don't blame them when these are used for evaluation. So one thing to kind of, recap some of this is that these are aspirational, but these are means of growth and development for the faculty member. Mary Katherine, like you said, sometimes I decide what I want to, where I want to grow, but I do that in coordination with a mentor, with a coach, with a department chair, with a division head, with a head of school that says, and David, I think you also need to maybe consider this too.
Yes.
But in a non-threatening way, because now here we need to differentiate very quickly. That may have needed to happen with the evaluative process. Maybe my head of school needed to say, David, you show up late every single day.
Right.
And that is evaluative, and that may be reason to, as Susan Scott said, be put to market. But a very, very different conversation can say, hey, I see you really trying to become more efficient in student-centered learning. And I love that you're taking those steps. Let's add that to the list of professional growth, and let's see if we can work on this together. That is night and day different.
Yeah. And let's be clear that the essential expectations that we talk about, those are things that ought to be talked about, as David said, on the regular, when they happen, documented, all of that stuff. That's the stuff that I think it's super gray for people as administrators It's super great. And to the point about defensiveness, I agree with that. And we're going to touch on this at the very end of this, but
Yeah.
here's the reality. People who are not self-aware
Mhm.
are defensive.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they're not self-aware and they're not able to, I mean, if you're self-aware, you know what are the things that you need to work on, and you also know that everyone has stuff to work on.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we talk about this in Enneagram work all the time. If you've done the work, then you're not near as defensive about looking at something and going, yeah, that's
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
as you are if you've not done the work. And so I think that is directly tied to culture, and that we've built a culture of it being safe to be vulnerable. It's safe to make mistakes. It's safe to ask for help. But it's also a culture where we're teaching our faculty to learn about themselves.
Yeah.
And know
Yeah.
more about themselves, so they know what are the areas what are my growth edges.
Yeah. My new head of school has asked me to read a book, and I forget the author's names right now, but it's called The Children Are Watching. And I think in a broad sense that's the thesis, that children are watching us. And
Yep.
when we embody these, I think that they are more inclined to do it too. So
Yeah.
I think that, again, we are separating an evaluator, right, from somebody who's a mentor. And the evaluation process of essential expectations, 95% of us should be achieving those regularly, because we know what they are. We know what the expectations are, and we're professionals. We can do that. But here's where the fun work, I think, happens. And again, I love this comment here. I don't think that, where she says it's coming from the public school sector. Teachers become very defensive.
Yes.
When these tools are used. Absolutely. And so let's remove some of that defensiveness. Let's create a culture of growth. And that means that we as evaluators need to not be evaluating in that moment. We need to be mentors. We need to be cheerleaders. We need to do as best as we can.
And we also need to model it.
Yeah.
We also need to show our own vulnerability, our own growth, our own willingness to learn.
Yeah, I love the Patrick Lencioni's advantage. He argues that, that we as leaders need to be vulnerable, right? We need to be very open. And I can try to empathize and try to understand people that aren't that. I'm as you'll say here in a second, I'm an Enneagram 2, so I'm probably more open than others. But we need to really model this. So real fast. Mm-hmm. We're really advocating for an evaluation process to be different from a professional growth process. And when ISM, and when I say different and divorced from, we mean that. That I need to be able to take leaps and to challenge myself to grow as a professional. And that is going to be messy, because I'm going to try assessments that are going to blow up. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to try to do stuff in class that is not going to work very well. But I will say from my kind of personal testimony, the work that I struggled with 4 years ago is now reaping benefits today. Real fast. Chapter 4, Susan Scott talks so fluently about creating a culture of feedback, a culture of growth that again, I have to kind of point to her. And then, Mary Katherine, I told you I'd give you at least 5 minutes, and I didn't do that.
Oh, that's all right.
But I think that our conversations so often about different personality traits and knowing yourself, and also knowing the people on your team, fosters the encouragement and the cheerleading that can happen with professional growth, by knowing who you are.
Yeah. And I think that begins, let's be real. It begins with you as the evaluator / coach / head of school. Yeah. It begins with you understanding how you operate. I told David the example, in the beginning of my time as a head of school, I'm an Enneagram 7. Okay. I'm an optimist. I like only positive stuff. I don't like negativity. I don't like complaining. I want to fix your problem and let's move on. And I learned that I was not very empathetic. And I had to really practice that and learn how to be a more compassionate, empathetic person and a listener. And I knew that was a growth edge for me. Okay. If I had said, that's not just who I am. I don't like it. I don't like negativity. I want to fix your problem. I'm here to fix it. Then I'm missing a whole opportunity to engage with people who are different than me. And so I think it begins with us learning ourselves. And then it begins with us insisting on faculty to understand themselves and how. So if you have to Melissa's point about defensiveness, most of our faculty and staff that work in our schools did not get into schools because they're aggressive, achieving people. They're not people who want to be CEOs, and they're not super aggressive. They're the 9s. They're peaceful and mediators. They're the 6s. They're loyal. They're the 2s. They're supportive. I mean, we see a lot. That's been my experience. It's not vast. Okay. There's no data. I have not done any real scientific data, but normally teachers, especially in the lower areas, are those numbers, 2s, 6s, and 9s. And they are loving and nurturing and kind. And they also receive, so they also take it personally, and they hear you're bad, not you didn't do that right, but you're not right. And what I would encourage you as a person of elite in leadership to do is to not only know yourself. So trust me, when I came into a conference where I was going to have to say some hard things, I had to be much less me. I had to find that compassion. And because I don't take things personally like that. I don't receive them that way. And I think that it's important for us to know who we are so that we can go, you know what? David's going to come in here and he's a 2, and he's super relational, and he cares very much about the connection he has with his students and his parents. And so when I say to David, this is an issue, he's going to immediately address it as I did something wrong with my connection with people.
Yeah. And
that's not what I'm saying. And so we got to know our people so that we can help them hear the words that we have to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that Susan Scott has helped me think of how to frame some of those conversations.
Right.
How to address when people are not meeting the expectations. I think that she has really helped provide even the language and like the templates for it. So she is very practical in how to do that. And so I think that, in just a quick way to conclude here is that by inviting multiple people into this process, again, you're right, Mary Katherine, that some people are at smaller schools where it may just be the head of school and a few lead teachers, but that's fine. But by bringing in multiple perspectives, I think that we're able to develop not only an evaluative process, again, that is separate from a growth process, but allows us to articulate our core values. Again, the unique value proposition that we have, but it also honors the professionalism of our faculty, and it honors their human dignity. Again, I will hopefully always work in Episcopal schools because of our commitment to respecting human dignity. And I think that needs to play out in these 2 systems. But in doing so, I think that it allows the school to be itself, to be its best self, and to really embody in a practical way the mission of the school that we hear so often from our heads of school.
I agree.
So this is really a tool or a series of tools to leverage and to define and to build and to curate culture while we are ensuring kind of answers to these 3 questions, like who are we, who do we hope to be in 5 years, and then how are we going to get there?
Yeah, I totally agree. David, this is awesome. And I just want to say that David and I got to know each other a couple of years ago. We met at NAES, and it's just a delight to have you. I know that Holland Hall is just going to really, really benefit from your leadership. And I'm looking forward to watching you just kill it there. So thank you for being doing this work. And thank you to everyone who got on the call. If you're watching this from from the recording. Thank you for coming. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and we'll hang out for just a minute if anybody has any questions. So you guys have a great afternoon.